All right, so today we're going to be talking about the 40-hour work week. Let's talk about this. So, first off, we have to understand that not every job requires a 40-hour work week. I don't know if this is law. This is one thing I wish I would have asked. I don't know if a 40-hour work week is law in order to earn benefits or benefit from the perks. But I do know that I believe this is a staple across every state in the US. And I'm pretty sure that in other countries as well, this is kind of the rule that you work 40 hours a week, right? So, one of the biggest obstacles that the 40-hour work week has is the cognitive limitation, right? Cognitive limitation, which is this one right here. Uh, we can only perform optimally for about 4 hours, actually 2.5 to 4 hours before we start to wobble in our cognitive output, right? So, what I mean by that is that we start to have diminishing returns after hour four. So, if we are producing something that takes a lot of cognitive power, it starts to come out erroneously, right? So a lot of that stuff stems from the not overproduction, but the over dedication to a craft. So usually jobs that require a ton of cognitive output, like drawing, what else, filming, anything in the arts, music, you name it. Like if you produce beats, if you write, and then of course, there's like two different kinds. There's a peak A and peak B. Peak A is fragmented focus. So these are corporate managers, executives, stock traders, portfolio managers. These jobs are incredibly intense because you're constantly moving back and forth, back and forth. So this is one of the ways that that cognitive overload looks like. Yeah, it's not an easy. None of these are easy jobs, right? Because you're constantly sitting down. You have to sit at meetings, listen to what's being said intently, and then after that, you have to go and talk to other managers, talk to other executives, stuff like that. It's pretty insane, right? And then there's peak B, generating original content. This is like YouTubers, which, by the way, you know for a fact that YouTubers constantly go through this because you will see content creators produce these videos about how they're burning out, right? So long form prose, musical scores, detailed visual design from scratch. These are the guys that like burn out. And I know because obviously I've been producing content for so long. I know what the burnout feels like because I've been an artist. I've been a commentator. I've been, what do you call it? Video editor with like intense effects. I've been all of that, and a lot of it is just cognitively demanding. So yeah, there's these two peaks, right? I did look into other occupations such as construction, and it turns out that when it comes to construction, there's a couple of nuances. They kind of fall into both peak A and peak B. So construction demands a lot from a person, which is why oftentimes when you go to construction, a lot of these construction folks will just go home and just, they'll just fall straight to bed, right? Some of them don't even fall in the bed. They fall on the floor because they don't have the coordination anymore because it's all been completely drained from them. But when it comes to jobs like plumbing, carpentry, electrical, framing, tile work, stone, cement work, all of that requires physical demand. You have to lift 90-pound bags, 44-kilo bags, right? Take them back to wherever you're going to dump the cement. And then, of course, you have to mix it. Then you have to lift it again, throw it or pour it into the empty space so it could fill. Yeah, it's very, very demanding. And then, of course, there's the mental aspect of it that you have to measure how much of the cement you're going to pour into the water, the consistency, all of that. It seems very minimal, but it's very taxing mentally, so there's a lot of that. And then of course you have to be pretty resourceful as well. It's not just mixing cement. There's other positions that you have to fulfill as well, because there's a lot of responsibility when it comes to construction. So this is what I figured out, that like a lot of these jobs are very demanding. So, when we tie this back to the 40-hour work week, you can see how like a lot of folks don't want to work for that long, especially when you're working in fields like this, where you're constantly moving around and you're also outputting a lot of mental energy. It just creates drag, right? So there's that. Now another thing that I learned is that even though we could potentially cut hours to these positions, these occupations, is it a good idea? Well, turns out that it can be a good idea, but at the same time, it can hurt tremendously. Okay. So, one thing that obviously comes to mind, if you guys have never thought about this question and have never dug deeper into the question, let me introduce to you guys the idea of, human error or human drag. So, essentially, let's say that you reduce the hours, right? If you reduce the hours, what happens is that you have to hire more people. When you hire more people, there's more room for human error. Now, this doesn't mean, well, actually, it does mean, it's because it's polysemic, the statement. So, first off, when it comes to human error, you potentially create more and more erroneous operations. So, there could potentially be a lot more flaws when it comes to working with so many people, because who knows what the person is feeling. Because remember, different people have different sleeping habits. Different people have different eating habits, all sorts of stuff like that can affect production. So that's one thing that we have to remember. They might not get along with other people, potentially want to sabotage the work. There's so many problems that come with that. The second thing is that, and this is probably the biggest one, if somebody wants to call off, right? If somebody wants to call off, but everybody's working a full-time position, who's going to fill that position, right? There's going to be some people who are potentially going to want to work overtime, but I don't know if overtime is going to be affected if we reduce the hours, right? We already work a 40-hour work week, so I don't see why we wouldn't carry that same policy over to the 30-hour work week. I'm sure that overtime is still going to be necessary. However, we don't know what it's potentially going to look like. So with that being said, it could potentially be a obstruction or an impasse where it could just hinder production. That's not good, right? Most importantly, who's going to fill the position? We're back to that question. Who's going to fill the position, right? I think this is the other one as well that I didn't mention. Salary, right? I don't know too much about salary because I didn't really dig into that, but salary is a pretty big deal. As a matter of fact, let's look into it. Okay, so I did look it up just a bit, and it turns out that it's the same, the same point that I made here. So I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. So if we were to reduce the 40-hour work week, right, that would mean that either salaries remain the same or they get paid a lot more or a lot less. But I think that ideally we will want to keep the same salaries, which is why we want to work less, right, and pay them more. That could potentially be a problem because what if, okay, because you got to remember, if we're going to reduce the hours, that means that there has to be the reduced hours has to equal or be greater than the production at 40 hours a week, right? If we can't meet that, then that means that these companies will start to diminish in returns and profit. That obviously isn't going to reflect well in the stock market, which means that investors are going to start pulling out, and it could probably just start a domino effect economically, right? It probably wouldn't be a good idea to do that, or perhaps that's just a slippery slope. I don't know. So if you're working 30 hours a week, you have to be able to produce what someone who was working 40 hours a week would normally produce. Who's going to do that? Imagine doing that. Imagine working like that in certain positions. Like, what if you have to hit a deadline if you're working in construction? You're not exactly going to be able to finish that if you're only working 30 hours a week, right? And since these jobs normally require construction workers to work Monday through Friday, I believe, what about Saturday and Sunday? Who's going to want to work those days? So you're going to have to produce a lot within those 5 days in order to even get the same production level, the same output as someone or a company that's having their staff work for 40 hours a week. So you can see that that's one of the problems. And one of the other problems is that if it does become too intense, they're not going to want to work that. There's probably most likely going to be diminishing returns because the workload is so insane. Probably no one's going to want to work that, right? So they're probably going to pull back. They're going to probably find another job. And then these companies suffer as a result, which means that the people who are dedicated, who can adapt to those 30 hours per week are probably most likely going to suffer, and they're going to have to move and find another job. But who's going to want to hire them when the job market is currently, but then again, it's probably going to be a different job market if we do that. But yeah, as you guys can see, the current job market, nobody's really hiring. So can you imagine you end up getting let go because your company, goes under? it's not easy to find another job, right? That's one of the most important obstacles. And I think that that's the only obstacle that I was able to find for now, obviously. Oh, and then nursing, of course, there's always nurses are always short in staff, right? So it's already bad enough that they have to work like 48 hours a week, because nurses, they work like 12-hour shifts, right? And they work 4 out of the 7 days of the week, or probably even more. So it's already intense. Who knows, man? Yeah, so firefighters as well. Oh, and that's another obstacle as well, that some jobs do absolutely require someone to be working 40 hours a week. So again, construction jobs are probably going to maintain that 40-hour per week schedule, whereas firefighters as well, they're probably going to maintain that. But opposed to like artists and other folks who work like in quantitative financing, or perhaps constructing code, writing script for rockets or whatever. Yeah, I can only imagine that a 30-hour per week job is probably going to fulfill them, right? Or be a lot better for those people. So that's kind of everything that I've learned so far. It is pretty interesting to know that, we all like to think that we could reduce the hours, that the 40-hour work week was essentially a script that was handed over to us by the devil. But the reality is that, yeah, some of these jobs absolutely require that 40-hour per week schedule. There's no way around it, especially construction. I just can't imagine construction workers only doing 30 hours per week, and then, these guys fall behind schedule. But then again, if you were to think about it, you could probably make the same argument for somebody, or if we had a system where instead of 40 hours, we were working 50 hours, right? They probably wouldn't want to reduce the hours to 40 hours, but yet here we are, right? But that's just a future that we can't really see because we haven't lived it. We don't know what it would look like. And obviously, when it comes to statistics don't exactly tell the entire story, right? So even if we do say that 40 hours per week is kind of a drag for humans, yeah, I don't really know about that, man. Again, there's a lot of debate when it comes to a lot of this stuff. So yeah, anyways, and then not to mention AI, but AI, we're going to talk about that some other time. This is kind of just more or less what I wanted to talk about when it came to like the 40-hour per week schedule. So you guys let me know what you guys think about that. And yeah, we'll talk more deeply about this some other time.